Incredible rescue. Black man fights to save 2 kids from frozen lake. Days later, miraculous SUV. The morning after the rescue played out like a film reel in Jason's mind, aching with the weight of fleeting glory. Cradling the 2 shivering children in his arms as he pulled them from the icy grip of the lake, one thought pierced through his exhilaration. Will this change anything? Now, a few days later, back at the garage nodding at customers who barely acknowledged his existence, it felt as if the lake had swallowed him whole. To save them was instinct, but to be hailed a hero felt like a noose tightening around his neck. The biting winter wind whistled through the cracked garage windows, biting into his skin. Each day melted into the next, the bills mixing with the exhaustion of being overlooked in every corner of his life. Ruthless days blended with sleepless nights, a whirlwind of worries spiraling around his kid's future, locking him in a cage. The mechanic shop he cherished felt like a prison of desperation as mounting bills loomed like storm clouds overhead. He remembered how easy it was to pull the children to safety, to act without thought, yet now he hesitated with each turn of the wrench, paralyzed by an unforgiving reality. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. In the back of his mind, the whispers of the community began to taunt him. They talked about a gift from the town's wealthy businessman, a new SUV for the town's hero. The idea gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. There he was, a mechanic with grease under his nails and a past of brushed-off talent, faced with an opportunity that reeked of charity, the very thing that belittled him for years. Could he truly accept help from someone who never saw his value? It felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of how far he stood from the pedestal the town wanted to build. The conflicting emotions stormed through him, betraying his desire for pride. He envisioned his children's faces lighting up, their dreams dancing in the fluorescent glow of the SUV's interior. But the thought of reinforcing the biases he'd fought against every day twisted his stomach. On the one hand, desperation clawed at him, pulling him toward the glimmer of security. On the other, the weight of his self-respect anchored him. He felt the gaze of the townspeople upon him, some supportive, others embittered by their own fixed views. In that moment, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his every move would write the narrative of his identity. Not just for himself, but for every young boy out there, looking up to him for guidance. Would he lead them down the path of external help while ignoring the journey of internal strength he craved? Each second he hesitated, stretched like the thin ice beneath him on that frigid afternoon, ready to crack and plunge him once again into uncertainty. As the debate raged, as eyes watched, and as community judgments swung like winter winds, Jason stood at the crossroads, a tempest churning in his heart. Would he claim the SUV, risk having the honor tied to someone else's charity, or would he brave this bitter storm alone, in search of dignity on an uncertain road? The crowd awaited his decision, but he lacked the clarity to know which way the answer lay. The morning light stabbed through the grimy garage windows, illuminating the haze of dust that lingered in the air like his unresolved thoughts. Jason leaned over the engine of a car, the familiar scent of oil tightening the knot in his stomach. His mind raced, each rotation of the wrench a reminder of his internal turmoil. He thought about the SUV, the idea of acceptance looming larger with each subsequent day. The chatter from neighbors, the hopeful nods from friends, all begged an answer that he was not yet prepared to give. His hands moved mechanically, tightening bolts with little thought as his mind ping-ponged between visions of securing his family's future and the shame that clawed at his pride. The garage was a cacophony of noise, the hum of machines, the shrill sound of tools hitting the floor. But it echoed nothing for Jason. The laughter of children outside only served to amplify his isolation, and with every laugh he felt a pang of envy for their innocence, how they didn't have to wrestle with the weight of expectations. As he wiped sweat from his brow, his reflection caught in the polished surface of the car's fender revealed a man caught in a loop of doubt. Was he merely the sum of his circumstances, or was there an uncharted path ahead, one he had yet to discover? Each day passed without a distinct mark. All he'd done was choose survival over risk, routine over aspiration. The financial strain began to pierce through the fog of his paralysis. The reminder of bill collectors lurking just outside the door sent a chill through him. He needed a vehicle to explore new opportunities, a way to reach customers beyond this small town, and yet the thought of accepting something he didn't earn stung more than any open wound. A burst of energy ignited inside him one afternoon as he examined an old sedan's brake system. Without realizing it, he began to see the intricacies of the components as much more than mechanical parts. They reflected his own life. Each piece, once thought to be insignificant, played a vital role in the vehicle's performance, just as each decision shaped his own trajectory. The thought of feeling whole, of recognizing that maybe he too was a part of something greater, ignited a flicker of courage he hadn't felt in a while. Stepping outside for a moment to breathe, he took in the frozen landscape stretching before him. He envisioned himself standing at the edge of possibilities, inches from the SUV, from transformation. The vision was immediately terrifying, like standing on the brink of that icy lake all over again, the cold gnawing at the edges of his resolve. He had saved those kids that day, but would accepting help actually become a vulnerability, or a stepping stone to something richer? Return to the garage felt like a retreat, a step back into comfortable chaos where the noise drowned out indecision. He began to fiddle with tools, feeling the weight in his hands, and the emotional stakes roiled once more. Could he confront those beliefs that shackled him? He thought of the children, their laughter echoing in his mind and forming a singular question that sliced through his self-doubt. What example would he set for them? In that moment, clarity washed over him, primal and unmistakable. If he chose to accept the SUV, who was he transforming? Jason felt the air around him shift, recognizing a strength he didn't know he had. But just as determination surged to engulf him, an old adversary whispered doubts from the shadows of his mind. The time had come to face those shadows, to understand whether accepting help would compromise his integrity or redefine it. With a mix of fear and conviction tightening his chest, Jason knew he was on the verge of a significant crossroads in his life, one that demanded more than just action, but a confrontation of the very ideals he held. Would he stand firm in fear or dare the leap towards acceptance? And as he tightened the last bolt, a rush of urgency coursed through him. A decision loomed ahead, one that could change everything. Would he take the path less traveled, or would he capitulate, fearing the price of dignity? Jason leaned against the weathered workbench, his heartbeat drumming a rhythmic urgency in his ears. The wrench lay forgotten in his hand, an extension of the tumult that raged within him. He stared into the depths of the engine, but his gaze was distant. His mind replayed fragments of yesterday's conversation. Carlos had stopped by, his voice filled with sincerity as he proposed the SUV again. "You can't let pride take away your opportunities, man," Carlos had said, the weight behind those words lingering like a heavy fog. Would he be defining himself by overcoming pride, or by running away from the chance to rise above his current circumstances? That question gnawed at him now, pulling him into a deeper internal debate. The hours spent in the garage felt inadequate compared to the deeper questions of identity that haunted him. In the shadows of his workshop, Jason could almost feel the expectations of his family pressing down on him. Every decision had rippling consequences. Every refusal to accept help seemed to erect a barrier between him and their future. He saw their faces, especially his son's, filled with hope, innocence, and an unspoken belief in him. His heart clenched tighter. He turned to the multi-drawer toolbox at the far end of the garage. Each compartment, a world unto itself, held an array of tools, the tangible results of his hard work. Grabbing a screwdriver, he felt compelled to begin addressing something, anything, that would restore a sense of control over his life. He could feel it, the ferocious energy that generated when he channeled his thoughts into action. As he meticulously removed parts, his mind wandered, contemplating the decisions he had sidelined. If I don't take a chance, how will I ever know my limits? The thought struck him, not as an excuse to accept the SUV, but as a question of self-discovery. Each piece he dismantled became a metaphorical exploration of his own life. Was he merely taking what he saw, or could he construct a new version of himself? Sifting through the steel and rubber, Jason stumbled upon an old rusted engine part that sparked an idea. Here lay remnants of forgotten machinery, pieces that once roared with purpose, now reduced to decay. It mirrored his risk of stagnation in the face of opportunity. The SUV could represent more than just a vehicle. It could be his chance to revitalize, to forge anew amidst the rusting remnants of a life driven by stubbornness. He felt movement inside of him, a budding realization surfacing. Could accepting help be the first step toward reclaiming autonomy rather than surrendering it? Would it symbolize a failure of integrity or a catalyst for growth? The reflection of sunlight peeled across the garage floor, drawing his thoughts to the outside world that beckoned beyond the confines he had created. Flashes of freedom surged through him, the possibility of reaching farther than the edges of his current existence. The thought was exhilarating, threatening to pull him from his short-sightedness. As he took a deep breath, the reservations quietly retreated, their whispers dimmed by the rising tide of determination. He picked up a piece of scrap metal, swinging it back and forth in the air, feeling like a warrior preparing for battle against unseen foes. "I won't be limited by what others think," he said aloud, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. With newfound resolve, Jason made a plan. The conversation with Carlos would not be an end, but a beginning. An honest discussion about needs, aspirations, and yes, pride. Just as he was orienting himself out of the garage, something caught his eye. An old newspaper clipping stuck to a magnet on the wall. Its faded headline read, "Man risks all to save children." He felt a cold prickle of recognition. It was his story, but was he still that man? Facing the truths of his past compelled him to bridge the gap between fear and courage. What next step would define him? Would it be clinging to illusions of self-reliance or embracing the vulnerability of risking to try? The decision felt imminent, each heartbeat synchronizing with the pulse of opportunity around him. But with the weight of history churning in his mind, one question remained. What would he uncover about himself when he truly sought to confront the limits of his bravery? The weight of the newspaper clipping lingered in the air long after Jason had turned away from it. Though he could hardly recognize the man in the article, their shared headline echoed within him, a reminder of the hero he once aspired to be. But with each passing day, it felt as if that version of him was fading, replaced by doubts and uncertainty. He stepped out of the garage, inhaling the crisp air. The cold bit into his skin, invigorating his mind as the sunlight warmed his face. The world outside was alive, full of momentum that contrasted sharply with the stillness he felt within. Each step he took felt charged as he walked towards the corner coffee shop that had become a sanctuary for him. Here, he had spent evenings observing, listening, and trying to regain a sense of belonging beyond his workshop. As he pushed the door open, the familiar aroma enveloped him, momentarily distracting him from his spiraling thoughts. Settling into his regular booth, Jason pulled out his phone, hesitating to even consider making that call to Carlos. Instead, he scrolled through social media, the screen flashing with snippets of others living vibrantly, taking chances, achieving dreams, breaking barriers, and here he was, mired in his own, still hesitating on the brink of change. What if he reached out to Carlos, and the initiative led to a conversation that changed him? But what if I fail? The familiar shadow of fear loomed over him, and he wrestled with the weight of that question. Would failure be a reflection of his worth, or an inevitable step toward growth? Then, amidst the scrolling abyss of digital influencers and curated lives, he noticed a post that caught his eye. An acquaintance shared a story of starting a new business, detailing the trials and triumphs along the way. As he read the account of vulnerability transformed into empowerment, Jason felt a flicker of inspiration. This wasn't simply a narrative of success, it was a collection of choices, some painful, many brave. Wasn't that what he was being called to become? Fueled by a newfound impulse, he set down the phone and allowed himself a moment of contemplation. Each small risk taken by that acquaintance, no matter the outcome, contributed to a story of growth. If he were to accept Carlos's help, he could adopt that same fearlessness, stripping his reluctant pride and replacing it with the courage to reach out. "What do I have to lose?" he murmured to himself, barely audible above the hum of the coffee shop. This question crystallized his fears, cutting through the haze. The answer was liberating. Everything Jason had been clinging to, a fabricated sense of self-reliance, the illusion of control, was holding him back. With fierce determination growing inside him, he picked up his phone, hovering over Carlos's contact. Yet the moments of silence felt agonizing. What if the conversation revealed his weaknesses rather than fortified him? As if suddenly awakened, his inner voice pushed back. "You will never know unless you try. You can't build strength without confrontation, of self, of truth." Finally, he tapped the contact and raised the phone to his ear. A ringing tone filled the space, amplifying the tremor of his heart. Each ring intensified the gravity of what this call could mean. Just as the call connected, Jason formed a clear intent in his mind. This conversation wasn't merely about an SUV. It would become a pivotal exchange, a chance to articulate his aspirations, his fears, and his dozen questions about withstanding the complexities of receiving help while striving to be a better father and a fuller version of himself. When Carlos answered, his voice warm and welcoming, Jason felt the first real shift of courage. "Hey, Carlos," he started, voice steady but heart-pounding. "I've been thinking." But just as he was about to dive deeper, the door swung open and a rush of frigid air whipped around him, cloaking the room with sudden uncertainty. A commotion erupted outside, drawing his attention. Something was taking place. What would he encounter when he stepped back into the chaos outside? The moment of truth was unfolding yet again, and as he turned his gaze toward the door, he felt an unsettling mix of anticipation and dread. Would this be another chance to reclaim bravery, or yet another moment to reflect on avoiding confrontation? His heart raced, pushing him toward the inevitable. As Jason's gaze locked on the doorway, the bustling noise spilled in like a breached dam. Unfamiliar tensions surged from the outside, intertwining with the disjointed rhythm of his heartbeat. He didn't have to think twice. The urgency to discover the source propelled him from his seat, and he stepped into the cold again. The scene was chaotic. A crowd had gathered near the lake, pointing, shouting different stories and fears. As Jason approached, fragments of conversations swirled around him. But one thing was undeniable. Something urgent and desperate called for attention. His instincts fired up. He pushed through the gathering crowd, a primal pull guiding him to investigate. The world around him blurred as the details sharpened, two figures struggling against the icy grip of the lake. The solemn cries of parents, pierced through the tension like arrows, begging for help. In that moment, fear morphed into raw determination. This was not the time for self-doubt or procrastination. Without a second thought, he thrust through the onlookers, shedding the hesitations that once weighed him down. He leapt forward, feeling the world sharpening to immediate focus. The chaos faded into muted background noise, his pulse a steady drumbeat urging him onward. "Call 911!" an unfamiliar voice yelled. "Get a rope!" someone else shouted. Rushing towards the edge of the frozen surface, he could see the two children clinging desperately to the ice where a fissure had formed beneath them. The scene ignited a flicker of recognition, an echo of hallowed childhood memories, sitting in the warmth of blankets after a snow day, just like that little boy who used to believe he could save the day. Jason felt his limbs move without hesitation, a decision born of instinct. He crouched, his heart racing, assessing the situation. "I'm coming for you!" he shouted over the growing noise, eyes locked on the terrified faces of the kids. At that moment, his dawning courage transformed into a tangible force. The uncertainty that had previously clouded his existence dissipated. Here was his opportunity to become the man he once idolized, an active participant in a life-saving endeavor. Calculating his next move, he glimpsed an opportunity for actionable risk. Without waiting another heartbeat, he took off his jacket and slipped on the ice, moving low to stay balanced. The ice creaked ominously beneath him, threatening to crack with every labored movement, but fear was eclipsed by determination. Jason could hear the children's cries growing fainter, cloaked by the urgency to act, a haunting reminder of his own struggles, the battles he had yet to fight. Frigid water splashed up around him as he inched closer to the kids, adrenaline surging through his veins with each step. The crowd erupted in an amalgamation of gasps. People shouted his name, urging him on, and for the first time in ages, he felt someone truly believe in him. In that hair-raising moment, Jason was more than an absent father or a diminished self. He was a force, a protector. Each movement toward the two frightened children reinforced who he wanted to become, disconnected from nagging self-doubt. As he reached for one of the children, grasping her small hand in his, he felt the pulse of purpose firm in his chest. He was no longer just a spectator in his life, but a pivotal player, rising to meet his sense of what was right. Life itself hinged upon this one moment. Just when he thought he had a grip on the situation, the ice shifted abruptly, and the expectant crowd gasped collectively, the tension hanging in the air, heavier than the chill. Would he be able to save them both, or would his quest for redemption bring more peril than he could handle? He was on the brink of transforming dread into fearless resolve, but as the ice beneath him groaned ominously, he instinctively questioned whether this truly was his moment, a strange twist of fate in the making. Would Jason emerge as the hero, or would he succumb to the doubts that had plagued him? The ice beneath Jason's feet creaked menacingly, and a sliver of panic flared within him. He had reached the first child, determination igniting his spirit, but the second child remained closer to the fissure, terrified, eyes wide with despair. Each shallow breath he took filled him with a profound awareness of the weight of failure, the overwhelming knowledge of what failure would mean. "Grab my hand," he encouraged, steadying his breath despite the chaos around him. The small girl in his grip looked to him, a flicker of hope sparking amidst her terror. Reassuring her, Jason locked eyes with her, giving her the strength that he was beginning to feel bubbling underneath his hesitation. But as he inched closer to the second child, Jason's heart caught in his throat as the ice shifted under him once more. The familiar voice of self-doubt whispering insidiously, suggesting he turn back to prioritize his own safety. The inner turmoil raged. He wanted to be more than the man who retreated. He needed to confront his own fears, to uncover what lay buried beneath years of discontent. A sudden rush of urgency, a desperate call from the onlookers, spurred him on. "The rip! Watch out for the crack!" Panic surged through the crowd as the water threatened to swallow the two children. Jason focused, recognizing that his commitment needed to outweigh his trepidation. In that moment, he had to choose. With a calculated resolve, he pulled the girl closer, his grip tightening as he called out again. "You can do this! Together we will get out!" He shouted to the other child, supporting both them and himself with a surge of adrenaline. Then a realization struck him, sharper than any knife. His life had become a series of missed opportunities, trapped in a cycle of self-criticism and avoidance. This moment was his chance at redemption, not just for the children but for himself. He latched onto the second girl's hand, gripping tight against the icy wind that stung his skin. The crowd's energy buzzed around them, a mix of anxious anticipation and fervent hope. As he reassured both children, he felt an unexpected clarity wash over him. This mission was not just about saving these lives, but also about redefining his own. With a final push, he began to maneuver backward. The ice remained unsteady, but his determination had swelled, sharp and clear. Behind him laid voices of hope, urging him to persevere. The singular focus of survival bore down, unifying him with the children as they clawed towards solid ground collectively. A sudden cracking sound erupted beneath them. Time seemed to decelerate, every second stretching into an eternity. Jason's breath quickened, instincts firing, but the pulse of bravery had emerged triumphant within. Multiple conflicting emotions swirled in him, fear, courage, and responsibility, a cocktail that fueled him onwards. A final heave, and Jason felt the solid land beneath his feet as the children were pulled free. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of shouts and gasps, as alive as he felt, torn between exhaustion and exhilaration. They stood, chilled yet whole, as rescuers rushed in to check on them. The remnants of his earlier self-doubt flickered on the edges of his mind as he took each breath, feeling the weight of his own triumph mixing with the palpable relief in the air. Yet as they were ushered away, his heart raced, not from excitement, but from an unsettling question that lingered. Had he truly transformed, or was this deed merely a temporary illusion of self-worth? As he stood there, Jason faced the agonizing truth about himself. Was this moment the beginning of a new path, or simply a fleeting escape? The night settled over the lake, darkness wrapping around him, and he couldn't shake the knowing. The real challenge had just begun. Unbeknownst to him, an unexpected visitor observed from the shadows, ready with a proposal that would push Jason to confront the depths of his spare existence. Exhaustion clouded Jason's thoughts as he stumbled away from the chaotic scene, the weight of adrenaline still surging in his bloodstream. The cheers of the crowd began to fade, replaced by a deafening silence that echoed the unease nestled deep within him. The two children were safe. They had made it out with him, but the fleeting nature of his emotional high left him with a nagging emptiness, a sense of being adrift in a sea of questions. The taste of triumph quickly soured. He had stepped beyond his familiar boundaries, proving himself capable of greatness in a single instantiation. Yet as the applause echoed in memory, he felt like an actor basking in the spotlight, all while a darker narrative simmered beneath. Who was he when the curtain fell? In the days following the incident, Jason found himself grappling with the aftermath. He returned to his routine with a quiet dread. Each day blurred into the next, his usual rhythms disrupted by the recent drama. The mundane nature of his existence felt sharper now, more pronounced against the backdrop of his heroic act. The stark contrast gnawed at him, demanding introspection. Was this who he wanted to be, or had he just stumbled onto stage for a moment, never to return? He started keeping a journal, an attempt to untangle his thoughts on paper. Each sentence was a battle. Words flowed, then descended into hesitations. The first page remained blank for days, an unsolvable puzzle reflecting his internal chaos. Even now, the image of the kids' faces, shocked and relieved, haunted him, prodding at the parts of himself he had long relegated. One evening, while dissecting his feelings about the rescue, his phone buzzed with a text that startled him back to the present. It was a simple yet ominous message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop. Tonight." The suddenness of it lit a spark of curiosity and apprehension. Jason had expectations for the future. He had dreamed of a fresh start, yet he had also feared that embracing this newfound momentum would lead to scrutiny. Who could possibly want to talk to him? Did they see him as a hero? The thought unsettled him. As he made his way to the coffee shop, Jason's heart raced. Instincts flared in the bone-deep shadows of self-doubt. What if they were there to critique him, hold him to standards he couldn't live up to? His mind raced through past encounters. He'd often retreated, seeking safety in anonymity instead of facing discomfort head-on. This felt like another chance to confront himself, however terrifying it might be. When he arrived, the familiar aroma of coffee wrapped around him like a warm blanket, but anything but comfort poured through his veins. He spotted a figure sitting at the back, an imposing man, dressed sharply, whose presence screamed authority. Jason approached with cautious footsteps, each one echoing with the weight of his lingering insecurities. "Jason," the man greeted as he motioned for him to sit. "I've been watching you." Jason's breath caught, tension thrumming in the air between them. "Watching me," he echoed, barely able to manage the words. "Yes. You saved those children, but more importantly, you displayed potential. I want to help you harness that." The words hit Jason like a battering ram against the fortified walls he had built around himself. Help? Was this what he needed? Or was this merely another opportunity for disappointment? The man continued, his voice a mix of intrigue and conviction. "You have the makings of something great. Let's explore that." Jason's mind raced, fear mingling with an unexpected thrill. It was a pivotal moment, one that could catalyze his transformation, yet the heaviness of what lay ahead loomed large. He had a choice to make, the familiar path of retreat or the road toward discovering what he truly could become. As he pondered, mirroring the choices he faced on the ice, a flicker of determination sparked within. But with that flame of resolve came the recognition of what he would have to ultimately confront: himself. In parting, the man left Jason with a single question that echoed in his mind long after their meeting. "Who do you want to become, Jason?" It was a simple inquiry, yet one loaded with the potential to unravel his understanding of destiny and self-worth. As he stood outside with the cold air biting at his skin, Jason realized he had one chance to redefine his narrative. The true journey awaited him. It just required a first step. But was he ready? In this burgeoning conflict between ambition and fear, a deeper reckoning beckoned, one that would test the very fabric of his identity. The coffee shop's neon sign flickered behind Jason as he stepped into the chilly night air, his thoughts still a whirlwind from the conversation. What did he mean by potential? The question gnawed at him. Was it just the act of bravery that had caught this man's attention, or was it something deeper, an intrinsic quality he had yet to discover? As he walked home, his breath visible in the freezing air, doubts simultaneously tugged at him. The weight of expectation was starting to settle in his chest, heavy like the box of trophies collecting dust on his bookshelf. Achievements that screamed of past glories felt hollow now, and the disconnection between who he was in those moments of triumph versus his current self was disheartening. He wanted to chase this new path, yet old habits loomed like shadows, resistant to change. Arriving at his front door, Jason hesitated. This was it. He could either close the door on the life he had known, the predictable life where he felt safe and familiar, or he could open it and step into the uncertainty of a new beginning. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, he turned the handle and stepped inside. Jason placed his jacket on the back of a chair and sank into it. He opened his journal again, finally daring to take up the pen. The page had been blank for too long, a literal and figurative void taunting him. He took a deep breath and began to write. "I want to be someone others can rely on," he wrote, his hand steadied by his conviction. "Someone who inspires strength." The ink flowed more freely after that, unleashing his thoughts as they tumbled onto the page. He noted the fear he felt about stepping into the unknown, but with each revelation he felt a flicker of courage bolstering his resolve. Writing became a ritual of clarity, a dialogue with his innermost ambitions and insecurities. "What if I fail?" morphed into "What if I try?" The next morning was an entirely different animal. The sunlight filtered through the window, warming the corners of his apartment that had felt unwelcoming for too long. Jason stood in front of the bathroom mirror, and instead of avoiding his gaze, he sought it out. "Today is the day," he whispered, igniting a promise to himself. He settled down at a local diner for breakfast, retracing the path from the coffee shop in his mind. The man's words resonated with him, and he realized he needed to be proactive about the next step. In a few hours, he would call the unknown figure. Jason understood the risk. It was a leap into vulnerability that could either elevate him or bring forth his insecurities. As he consumed his eggs and toast, he scanned the bustling diner filled with laughter and noise, an ordinary scene that felt radically uninspiring. The world continued its orbit as he stayed firm in his thoughts. The desire to shape his narrative was stronger than the fear of criticism. He was prepared to confront this next chapter of his life. But how could he begin that journey? Right then, the realization struck him. He needed to find a mentor, someone who could guide him through this crucible of self-discovery. It was strange how he suddenly envisioned himself surrounded by other driven individuals, pushing boundaries and striving for greatness. After leaving the diner, Jason texted the man from the night before, his heart racing as he hit send. "I'm ready to talk." The confirmation felt monumental, a declaration that resonated deep within him. With renewed determination, Jason found a local community center that offered various workshops and mentorship programs, eager to immerse himself in this new world. But as he delved deeper into his research, an unexpected name popped up. A figure from his past, a member of a coaching staff he had once admired. Memories flooded back, lessons learned, moments of honest critique he had both envied and feared. His resolve solidified. This was not just a transition, it was an opportunity to weave together the threads of knowledge from his past with the ambition of his future. As he stood on the brink of calling this long-ago mentor, a thought crossed his mind, chilling and electric. What would he think of me now? Would he see the potential, or merely recognize all the failures Jason was trying to escape? The phone felt heavy in his palm, the delay in dialing reflecting his turmoil. But before he could dwell further, he took a deep breath, steadied his resolve, and pressed dial. Change was occurring, and he was not turning back. The fear of what he might discover about himself danced chaotically in his mind, but they were steps he needed to take. But as the phone rang, an anxiety pulsed within him. Suddenly the thoughts crashed like waves. What if this meeting opened floodgates he wasn't ready to face? With the connection buzzing, he braced himself for a moment that could redefine his existence. "Hello, Jason." The voice was familiar yet foreign, a gateway opening onto the precipice of discovery that beckoned him forward. Jason's stomach tightened as the voice reverberated through the line, full of authority and familiarity. Each syllable landed like a weight on his chest. "Hello," he managed, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded despite the turmoil inside him. "It's been a long time. How are you?" The warmth in his mentor's voice felt both inviting and daunting, a reminder of past accolades and the weight of unrealized expectations. "I'm okay," Jason hesitated, searching for the right words. "I wanted to talk about my journey, where I am now." The floodgates opened. The kernel of bravery had manifested. "Sure. Can you tell me what brought you back to me?" Jason gathered his thoughts. His gut pressed him to peel back the layers, to expose the vulnerability he had carefully concealed. "I've been at a crossroads. I feel like I've lost something, and I'm trying to find it again, to discover who I really am." There was a poignant silence on the other end, and he could almost hear the wheels turning in his old mentor's mind. "You realize discovery isn't always about finding something new. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what was lost." The words wove through Jason's mind, resonating with an unexpected clarity. As they continued their conversation, Jason felt the layers of skepticism he held about himself start to crumble, replaced by a newfound determination. His mentor was laying it out plainly. "What have you done to cultivate that potential you feel is there? Have you committed to any practice?" The question struck him, invigorating and unsettling. No, he had merely floated through days, hoping for inspiration to find him, yet he hadn't initiated the effort required. "I haven't. I've been avoiding commitment out of fear." Fear lies. It whispers that comfort in the past is wisdom, when in reality, it's stagnation. Jason felt a jolt of recognition echo through him. This wasn't just a life lesson, it was a battle cry. He imagined himself, the myriad opportunities that had slipped away. He had been coddled by the allure of the familiar. Then it's time to choose a practice. Shadow your inspiration. Observe what drives them. Embrace discipline in whatever form it might take, his mentor advised, each word punctuated with underlying strength. Jason's thoughts raced. Beneath his fears lay a path characterized not by mere existence, but actively engaging in life. "I'm ready to embrace that challenge," he stated definitively. Their session unfolded into plans and ideas, layered with ambition and determination. They discussed goals, specific and measurable. As they spoke, Jason felt an ember ignite within the depths of his resolve. He began to dream again, reimagining the contours of his life and the actions needed for fulfillment. As their conversation wound down, his mentor's voice softened. "Remember, change is not linear. You will stumble, but your readiness to confront those setbacks defines your journey." Reinvigorated, Jason ended the call, yet the air felt heavy with uncertainty. He was standing at the edge of a precipice he had long avoided. His wish for a mentor had been fulfilled, yet the shadow of self-doubt loomed large. What if this new endeavor led him farther astray, instead of closer to his dreams? Shaking off the clouds of anxiety, he pulled out his journal to scribble actionable steps he could take. Find a new hobby, take a class, volunteer, do something, anything, he wrote fiercely, leaning into the burgeoning excitement of possibility. With each line, he began to feel less like the previous version of himself and more like the warrior ready for challenge. But as he closed the journal, uncertainty nagged at the edges of his excitement. Would he truly embrace those challenges, or would he revert to old failings? The echoes of his former self whispered caution, but they were drowned out by an inner conviction growing louder. With a deep breath, Jason made a decision. He would take that leap of faith, and as he metaphorically released his past, a pulse of visceral truth crossed his mind. The time had come to face the deepest corners of his existence. He was ready to act, but in that moment of exhilaration, a lingering question brewed inside him, unsettling yet electrifying. Would he have the courage to confront the person he had been, the person he feared he might still be? Determined but anxious, he stood on the threshold of transformation, ready to navigate the brimming potential ahead. But that thought held him hostage. What if I stumble, and what will that reveal? Jason emerged from the fog of those troubled days, with a fierce clarity radiating from within him. The anxiety of the past had to yield to the self-determination that kindled in his heart. Every wrench he turned, every bolt he tightened, mirrored an aspect of his journey. He realized his mechanical prowess was not merely about fixing cars, but about mending the fractured components of his own life. As the sun broke over the horizon one wintry morning, Jason stood in front of the garage, inhaling the crisp air. And for the first time, he did not feel swallowed by his fears. It became evident to him that acceptance was a progression to achievement, rather than a diminishing of dignity. The memories of the 2 children he'd saved flooded back, along with the voices of the townspeople, some cheering, some skeptical, but all waiting for him to define what it meant to be a hero. The pending discussions were replete with possibilities. Jason reached out to Carlos. It was time to discuss that SUV. He felt empowered, knowing he needed a mode of transportation to expand his horizons, not only for himself, but for the welfare of his children. He could avoid falling back into despair, allowing this to be the push he needed, rather than a symbol of charity. He had had his fair share of struggles, but was ready to forge ahead and grow. As he sat on the worn wooden stool at the helm of the garage that afternoon, tools seemingly took on a life of their own, clanging in applause for his newfound narrative. The emotional weight lightened, and Jason could finally appreciate his skill set. The local community center offered skills workshops, and he decided to volunteer his mechanical expertise. His engagement with community projects provided a platform for both personal and communal growth. He forged ahead with tenacity, confronting his reluctance. Conversations with his mentor crystallized into pragmatic insights. The evolution of Jason was multifaceted. Wherever he stepped, he consciously embodied resilience. As weeks went by, he embraced the discomfort of vulnerability by speaking at garage workshops about perseverance and overcoming limits. He shared his story not only as a protagonist hero, but as someone still navigating boundaries. Those sessions began to draw small but stable crowds. Mothers, fathers, and children alike were listening intently, their faces illuminated with hope, often echoing Jason's own fears back to him. In turn, he saw his fears lessen, replaced with purpose, playing out on the canvas of community. It turned out the act of sharing transformed him into a pillar for others. Momentum erupted within him as he accepted the SUV, transforming his reality. No longer was it just an object. It became a portal to new opportunities. With each drive, he envisioned the miles he could cover beyond their small town. His children's laughter filled the space, invigorating him, reminding him that he was not simply a mechanic, nor a fleeting hero. He was their unwavering father, someone they could count on, capable of adapting and growing. Recognition began to bloom within his community as more people flocked to his garage, eager for services and supportive of the initiatives he undertook. The press dubbed him a hometown hero with true grit, but those accolades no longer fazed Jason. He had conquered not only the icy grip of fear, but had stepped into the warm embrace of success. He could accept help while still holding on to his integrity. On a brisk spring evening, Jason basked in simmering satisfaction as he gazed out over the parking lot of his flourishing garage, filled with the hustle and bustle of curious neighbors and devoted customers. It was a place alive with possibility, echoing the internal ambition he had ignited for himself. One could see that the mechanics of life had begun to align perfectly, shifting from chaos to symphony. It was a painted portrait of transformation, with each brushstroke further defining who he had always aspired to become: grounded, capable, unyielding. They were not simply remnants of his past, but a springboard propelling him into the realm of newfound dreams. As he looked to his children playing in the distance, it was clear Jason had forged a new legacy for them, one of courage, acceptance, and relentless pursuit of self-betterment. So today, the world watches, and Jason knows that true heroes are not defined by a single act, but by the totality of their journey. The efforts to inspire others radiate from him, and within, he is filled with boundless assurance. He set forth to illuminate the path for others, just as he did for himself, a beacon of hope, who understands that no one stands alone in their pursuit. And in this moment, Jason began to reflect on the promise he would not forget. I am ready for what comes next, for I have finally claimed my place in this world. Now's your chance to engage with stories of overcoming challenges, just like Jason. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show us you're as passionate about personal triumph as we are. Comment your reactions and theories about Jason's journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Remember, only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions. Don't wait even one more second.